All right, so we're going to go into Ecclesiastes chapter 2, and I'll be reading verses 12 through 17. So I turned to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what will the man do who will come after the king except what has already been done? And I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity. For there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool. Inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten, and how the wise man and the fool alike die. So I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after the wind. Happy Tuesday morning, ladies. I promise you we get there. Wow, heavy words, right? You can feel the sense of pessimism and darkness that fills him as he pens these words. So we're going to go back because there's a lot packed in there, and we really need to go back and we need to unpack it. What is he saying? It does have a tendency to have a downer feeling to it. So in verse 12, Solomon returns to an idea that he had mentioned earlier. He says what? He says, so I turn to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. So he had talked about that before, so now he's going to focus in on it. You know, sometimes you start up here with a high level on something, and then later you go, we're really going to dive into this one. So that's what he's going to do. He's going to dive into this comparison. What question does Solomon pose in that verse? He says, for what will the man do, right, who will come after the king, except what's already been done? So who is a man who will come after a king? If you were to answer that question, who would we say comes after the king? A son can. Sometimes there's not a son, there might be somebody else, a next of kin. We always call what that position is the same thing. It's the heir to the throne. It's the next person, whoever the next person's going to be. What question does Solomon ponder about this next king or the heir in that verse? What's he going to be? You know, why even bother? I've already done it all. Basically, that's what he's saying. He's not going to be able to do anything different than I did, right? It's strange that that's the way his brain is processing, but there's a reason that he's put it that way, and he gets to it by the end, all right? He can only follow in the footsteps of Solomon. And what had Solomon accomplished? We talked about this last week in detail. What were the things that other parts of the scripture, like in 1 Kings, what did they give us detail about the things that Solomon had accomplished from your memory? Building projects, right? Building projects galore. He reigned over an entire kingdom in Israel, right? That was discussed and highlighted for us several times in scripture. He accumulated wealth beyond what anybody else had gathered before, especially in Israel, right? And he enjoyed exceedingly the pleasures of life. We talked about that. He shared that with us. What else? The wisest king before, and there's been nobody wiser since. He says, as king of Israel, there is nothing new to do that Solomon, as the king, had not already accomplished. How would you like to walk in those shoes after the fact? Right? So in verse 13, what observation does Solomon share? He says, I saw that wisdom excels folly, and he gives us the comparison to as light excels darkness. Now again, let me remind you, this is not done in the language, so there may have been other things communicated here and why he chose certain words that have been lost to us. But even with what we do know about the words that are chosen, we can make sense of it. So what do you think, what word, so part of what we do in here is not just me walking you through. I want to ask you questions so you're engaging in the answers. I want you to think through what questions would you ask, because that's how you learn to do study. You have the Spirit, you can learn to do the study of the Word. It takes time and it takes practice, but you can do that. So if you were looking at that verse, what is a question that you would have? Well, before that, what does he mean by excels? What do you mean, right? And those two we'll look into later, right? But kind of wisdom and folly we kind of know, but what does he mean by excel? What do we assume that it means, right? That it's better than, right? That's what I want to be careful with. Don't go with what your assumption always is. It could be right, but check it out. Make sure that that word has the same meaning for this author written in this time as it would for you. How many times have you had conversations with somebody where you have a definition, you use a word, but it means something to you over here, somebody else is using the same word and they have a completely different definition. And who knows how many engagements you've had with the person back and forth before you guys finally discover, we're not even talking about the same thing. We weren't even talking about the same thing. Definition of terms is really important. When I used to coach debate, that was the very first thing you do in the process of a debate round is let's be in agreement about what the words mean that we're going to sit here and talk about. Okay, so defining your terms is really important. So in this case, we go look up the word that's used in Hebrew. What does that word mean? And it can be the definition of it. Often, though, when we're trying to find it, you go to other places in Scripture where that exact word was used and how did they define it or interpret it. Because it's not always the same. You would think the translators would always have used the exact same word, but they didn't. So this word, it's yithron, it's advantage or profit. It's interpreted as advantage in 5 different places in the Scripture. It's interpreted as excelled in 2, and it's interpreted as profit in 3. Okay, so they all have a little different connotation, but the one thing we can say in all of them is, remember the line that we talked about? It means something above the line. So this would be the same word that was translated for us back in chapter 1, verse 3 as advantage, and profit back in chapter 2, verse 11. So it's like the same word in the same book, and they've chose to interpret it 3 different ways. One time is advantage, one time is profit, and now is excel. Do you see why it can be confusing when you're trying to unpack what is here? So wisdom does not have an advantage or a profit over folly. Yes, ma'am?
Every time it's the word wisdom.
No, excel. We're on the word excel.
And I don't have that in my version, so where
It is in the verse it says, and I saw that wisdom excels folly. What do you have?
mine just says it's better.
Oh, okay. There's another way of putting it. Okay. That one made that determination for you. And so it probably would not have brought up that question for you in your mind. It's better, which is true. That's exactly what it means. Right? That's how we clarify, right? Okay, so do you see that's the thing that we're looking at. How does the one have an advantage or profit or excelling or is better than the other? So that's the question that he's put forward. In verse 14, how does Solomon describe the advantage? So now he's going to give us the measurement tool. What does he say? The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Doesn't that kind of seem weird? Because everybody's eyes are in their head. Even the fool's eyes are in his head. So that must have some deeper meaning. Okay? The wise man's eyes are in his head compared to the fool walking in darkness. So the wise man's eyes can see things that the fool will not be able to see. Is that a stretch for anybody? Does that kind of make sense with what would be written there? Like one who walks in light to see, and one who walks in darkness cannot see. So what Solomon is saying here is what any one of us or anybody reading this could understand. If I'm walking around in the light, I can obviously see things that when you turn the light off, I can't see. Even if I have the best eyes, I cannot see through the dark. That's the divide of the difference between somebody looking at something who has wisdom and one who is of folly. They can't see it. No matter how hard they tried, they wouldn't be able to see it. Keep that in mind, ladies, when you're sharing all these truths that you know from Scripture. If you're talking to somebody without the Spirit, they don't have the light to understand what you're saying. It does not matter how much sense it makes to you. It seems totally logical to you, and you go, I don't get why they don't see it like I do. They don't have the light. Yes, ma'am?
Does wisdom mean light then?
No. He's giving that comparison because some people, when you're tossing around phraseology that not everybody would understand, like wisdom or folly, like what really is the difference there? Because some very wise people do really silly things. Okay, so he's not talking about it in that sense, and that's his point. From your discernment ability, you've got the wise and the foolish, and they are as separate as in the light and in the dark. Okay? Does that make sense? I mean, that would make sense where he's going. Question? Yes, there are a lot of fools with the Holy Spirit in many ways. Sorry, I'm not trying to be. Yes. Exactly. That's because our whole walk is about understanding the Word a little bit better every single day that we study it. So when we first come to Christ, we're not going to have the discernment or the level of understanding of Scriptures that we should have if we've been trying to read and understand the Word. And as we get further down, sometimes when you start to research something, for me, I just want to put my head down and go, I didn't realize all I didn't know. There was this generic thing I knew I didn't know much about. And then I start to try to learn it and I go, okay, that's way beyond me. There's so much that I don't know. So I can shut down and not try, or I can go, you know what? I am going to try to learn a little bit today and a little bit tomorrow and a little bit the next day. And that's what we do with his word. There is so much here in this word. There is not ever one of us that's ever going to comprehend all that it has to say for us. Right? We are going to learn something. I mean, how many times, like I said last week, you read the Scriptures and you go, who wrote that in my Bible? Since the last time I read it. It's right there. How did I not see it? So, yeah. There was another hand? Yes.
I'm taking, in other words, the person with wisdom will look up something or find something pertaining to it, jumps into it and messes it up.
Well, that can be, so we have somebody that's sharing the difference between somebody getting into a project with wisdom, they research, they try to do it, versus a fool that just thinks they already know it and don't read the directions. Okay, that would describe a lot of men in my experience, so I want to be really careful that we don't go there. What is this thing? This is the instructions back here in the box. I'm like, hello, we could have started with that. It can be an outpouring of it, but I wouldn't say that's the total description that he's talking about. Solomon is going things that are not under the sun. He's actually oftentimes speaking about those higher level things, spiritual or eternal things that they can't comprehend. So Solomon enjoyed the pleasure of fruits of his labor, more restrained than all the overindulgences of one that was a fool. So even in that, there was some advantage in his wisdom. And notice that's in the context of what he's just been talking about. He's been talking about what he experienced and that he held back. So to me, that's why he's doing this comparison again. Yeah, I may have done some things that were for my pleasure, but even in that, right? There's a difference between what the wise indulges in and what the fool indulges in, right? This comparison is put forward. In verse 14, what does he say is also true? The same fate awaits them all. It would seem that that wouldn't be a really wisdom thing to say. Anybody can say that, right? It's for a comparison that he's making that assessment as he moves on. There's something here that's important. In verse 15, what reasoning does Solomon apply now? Then I said to myself, he's back to, I'm having this internal conversation. I was talking this over with myself. This too is vanity. So he's going to now talk about that, but he's giving you his conclusion again before he goes on to the description of it. What is vanity? The fact that it doesn't matter whether I approached it as a wise man, as a fool, in the end, guess what? We both die. So even the approach was vanity, right? Even it had a meaninglessness, because he kind of talked about it like, yeah, a little pride going on there. Well, at least I didn't do what that guy did. At least I didn't overindulge in that thing, right? But in the end, he goes, yeah, but we both die. So what advantage was there in having wisdom in approaching all these things? He's really admitting I was a fool in that regard when he says that it was all vanity. So since both will have the same fate, what does it cause him to ponder? Why then have I been extremely wise? To what profit, to what advantage was it that I was wise if we're both going to die in the end? If both have the same fate and Solomon's wisdom did not give him a different fate, what does he conclude? I read that part sooner than later. Sorry, ladies. So this is where he gives his conclusion. So I then said to myself, this too is vanity. Solomon sees the having of wisdom in and of itself to be vanity or meaningless. And if you think about it, doesn't it make more sense the wiser you are? Shouldn't you be making some different decisions? And yet you can be really wise and be making the foolish decisions. In reality. Verse 16, Solomon explains this how. He says, there's no lasting remembrance of the wise man, as with the fool. So the focus is on the what? In that verse. What would you say the focus in that verse is? What is he looking at that he brings your focus to? The what? What's the word? Let's start with the word that's used there that you would look up, that you would say, that's what the verse is focusing on. The lasting remembrance. That's what the focus is on, right? Because he's saying it's missing in both, all right? So lasting remembrance, he defines for us how. But what does he define the lasting remembrance of? He gives a time period. In the coming days, which would be what? We would say in the future. In the future days, right? That's the remembrance of things that I did that was so great or so foolish in the days to come. He says, what is true about those future days? All will be forgotten. So that's why I painstakingly do that verse, each one of those linking to the next one. It's the remembrance. And it's the remembrance in the future. It's the remembrance of the things to come. Not going to be remembered what I did in those days to come. So using Solomon as an example, we know he had more wisdom than any other man before him or since. Where is that wisdom now? Lost. We don't have it. Wouldn't you think it would be amazing if we had had a record of every single thing that the wisdom of Solomon brought to him? Not only would that be an amazing read, okay, every generation since him would have added to that amazing knowledge and wisdom. Can you imagine all the things that we would know today? But that's not how it unfolds. That's what he's pondering. I have all this amazing knowledge and wisdom. I just sure wish I could pass it on to the next guys so they don't have to redo it. How many of you feel that way? Yeah, right? We have these things we've learned, these hard lessons, and we'd sure love to pass that on to somebody else. What's that? Now put that on steroids. That's what Solomon's dealing with. How you feel when you try to transfer information to your children, that's exactly what he's feeling like, but on the grander scale. I'm going to tell you this, ladies, I have done so much counseling, and this is something I say to especially moms, because obviously I deal with a lot of women. Do you really think that I could ask your children what you believe about any subject in the world and they wouldn't know the answer? They know exactly what you think about everything. They sometimes know better than we do. Don't beat them over the head with it, because it doesn't sink in that way. Okay, enough counsel on that one. I'm just saying, it doesn't work. All right, so let's go back. So there was no record made of all the wisdom to pass on to future generations that has survived. We don't have that. Why was the wisdom achieved not kept first of all, right? How come it disappeared so quickly and then not added to by others? What the wise man knew and did is lost, the same as what the foolish man knows and does. There's no difference in those two. It's not like the wise stuff sticks around and the foolish stuff disappears. They're both gone. In verse 16, what else is true for each man? He says, and how? The wise man and the fool. So he's back to that again. And we both die. What we're going to do is not going to be remembered. And oh, by the way, we both die. Pessimistic literature at its finest. Verse 17. What did this realization cause Solomon to say? What specifically did he hate? He goes on to say what? For the work which has been done under the sun was grievous to me. So the work Solomon accomplished on earth in his temporal life were grievous to him now. Remember, this is in his older years with his chance to ponder and look back. This is a pretty serious statement, what he means by grievous. It's not a generic, oh, I was just a little disappointed. And we're going to talk about why he uses that word grievous. Why did he consider the work grievous in that verse? Because everything, right? He's back to the everything is futility and striving after the wind. Even in all that he had accomplished, he can now have that conclusion about what that was. All Solomon had accomplished was only done here on earth. That's why he says, under the sun. Yes, ma'am?
Does Solomon really know what he's looking for?
I think as we get further through, we will find that, yes. I think he's walking through the process. You know, sometimes you have to write out your thinking process to share with somebody else, but you kind of save your conclusion for the end. But he's letting you know up front, I have this theory that life is meaningless. And now he's walking you through the thinking process. So we're on that journey with him, but yes. I think it's at the end. It's a memoir at the end. He's not walking us along as he's having these discoveries. He's at the end of his life and he's looking back and he's saying, from this vantage point, I can say it's all this. You can look at this and know it. You can look at that and know it. You can look at my personal experience and know it. There's plenty of reasons to say that my conclusion that I gave you up front is the truth. Okay? All those things were considered futility. Nothing with lasting value outside the earth. That's why he says under the sun. He references that here. Or to those in the future in a lasting, valuable way. That's why he talked about the remembrance isn't going to be there. Solomon found he actually had done what in that verse? Striving after wind. So chasing after something his whole life, only now to realize that he had not achieved the things in the ways of his wisdom. That'll take the wind out of your sails. That's what's sobering. And that is what's weighing heavy on Solomon's heart. So he goes on now in Ecclesiastes 2, and we're going to do verses 18 through 23. He says, "Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. Therefore I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and a great evil. For what does a man get in all his labor and in his striving with which he labors under the sun? Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity." So in verse 18, not only did Solomon realize the wisdom he had was grievous, but what else does he say he hated? I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun. Seems extreme, doesn't it? It's like way out there. I hated it. I hated all of it. Why does he hate this labor? He tells us why. He doesn't leave it generic. Why does he hate the labor in that verse? For I must leave it to the man who's going to come after me. That's what made it so horrible to him. You think that was news? You think Solomon somehow thought he was going to be immortal? No, right? It was always there. In verse 19, why does leaving all the fruit of his labor to someone concern Solomon? He tells us. Is this man going to be a wise or a fool? He's already talked about, there is a little bit of difference. I mean, they all die, but gosh, it'd be nice if it could at least be a wise person. I didn't say wise guy because that has a different meaning for us now. With all Solomon's wisdom, he does not have the ability to control the category his heir will be in, being a wise man or a fool. What does Solomon conclude? He, this unknown person that could be a fool or be wise, will have control over all the fruit of the labor which I labored in while I was acting wisely under the sun, right, with what the earth can give. This too is vanity. How had Solomon gained the fruit of his labor in that verse? He gives credit to by acting wisely under the sun. So he did the things that we would measure here on earth. He acted very wisely. He planted vineyards. He built buildings. He had relationships with other kingdoms. He knew about horticulture and all kinds of things. With what he was given, for what he could figure out here on earth, he'd done a pretty good job. But in the end, he calls it vanity. The fact that someone can receive all the benefits earned by someone else, Solomon declares it to be what? This too is vanity. This is another reason the way the world works in determining where an advantage can be is meaningless, and it makes no sense. It doesn't. It doesn't make sense. All the good guys don't always get the good things, and the bad guys only get bad things, right? We have a world that seems completely backwards most of the time. And he's like, this is meaningless. Right? From a logical, wise perspective, I should be a wise person. I should come along. I'm the wisest person ever. I built all these things. I get to pick the next wise guy who I'm going to help be as wise as I am so he can do even better with all these things I'm going to give him. I gave him such a head start in life. Wait, that's not going to happen now. In verse 20, because this is a reality, what does Solomon say? I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor for which I'd labored under the sun. It sounds like he's talking in circles, ladies, doesn't it? We're back here again, over and over and over, because something is brewing in his mind that's pretty awful with the labors that he has produced. It has lost all its meaning to Solomon. It now means nothing. His whole entire life, building everything he built, knowing all that he knew, all the wisdom that it now means absolutely nothing to him at this stage of life. Verse 21, Solomon explains exactly what this means, how. He says, when there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. So Solomon broadens his explanation to anyone who finds themselves in the position, not just him. When he says, when there is a man. He doesn't just say himself. He's like, when there's a man that does this, right? He's trying to reach out again to the audience through, this is not just something I'm experiencing. This is a reality and a truth. When this happens to a man, this is not just something that he had experienced. A man who has done what? Who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then gives his legacy to one that had not labored with them. So what is his focus, would you say? What's that? It's unfair. What is unfair? So would you say that he gives his legacy to one who didn't help build it? And that does seem unfair. That's what he's talking about. But he's focused on the legacy part of it. So he could be struggling with that. And we're going to talk about why. Because he didn't have a choice. Solomon didn't go, well, I think I'll just pass this on to a fool. God intervened in a big way, and we're going to talk about that. So when you say the word legacy, again, sometimes we use words that maybe a younger generation wouldn't know or whatever. What do you mean when you say legacy? It can be an estate. It's something that's handed down, but you might be remembered for. Oftentimes we think of it in terms of, when I am going to leave my inheritance to my children, do I think they get all the knowledge that their mom has up here? No. They might get a little of that through training or whatever, but that's not really what we use as that term. They might get my house, or they might get my poodle, or they might get, who knows, right? That's the inheritance. But legacy often has more than just the thing, doesn't it? It's who we are. It's what we've spent our life accomplishing. We want that to be passed, whatever that is. It's not always the same for everybody. But whatever that is, there's something we want to pass on. It means so much to us that we've spent probably our time, our energy, our money, right? Those things that rose to importance. We get to that point, we want to share that. Okay? He doesn't feel any different.
It's like sharing your experience with somebody who has no clue.
Exactly. Think about all that he had, right? An amazing kingdom. All these houses. Let's not forget, the temple of the Lord was built within there too. Right? Yes?
To me, a legacy is something much more than just
the stuff.
It is what you are remembered for throughout history.
Right. So, and I would say that's exactly what Solomon's focus is on, his legacy in that big way, in that big picture. So this is describing a person that inherits something they had nothing at all to do with. That's his focus in this verse, with the acquiring of the building of the legacy that one was leaving behind. But I think you're right. I think that's more his focus, that bigger term legacy. When this happens, what does Solomon have to say about it in that verse? This too is vanity. And, there's something different now. He has not declared it to be a great evil before. Everything was vanity before, but now he attaches this great evil. This one rises to some different level for Solomon. So a legacy can change in one generation, or maybe more, right? Somebody that does something great for a generation, they're remembered for it, And in our culture, how many people that had legacies that have lasted, 200-300 years are just being thrown under the bus, no legacy at all, or a negative legacy. You're watching it every day. Legacies are being just tossed out left and right. Doesn't mean anything to anybody. So a legacy based on what they do on earth is described as under the sun. So again, he gives that clarification for us. It's back to the things that we achieve here, not eternal things. The under the sun is always the clue that he's talking about things done in this life, on this earth, in this temporal realm. And we'll get to other things when we get later into Ecclesiastes of what is the other that he's looking at, but he keeps defining this one for us over and over. Here on earth, temporal, what you're doing in this life. Solomon says this is not just meaningless, it actually moves to being a great evil. And Solomon expresses a stronger impact in this declaration. We're going to talk about why. So we're going to step away. And we're going to talk about what exactly happened to Solomon so you can see what is on his mind as he's writing this part of Ecclesiastes. We're going to go back to 1 Kings. We're going to look at chapter 11, and we're going to do verses 1 through 13. We've talked about some of this before, but now I want your attention is going to be driven to what is being revealed in those verses. So I'm going to start 1 Kings chapter 11. I'm going to start with verse 1. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and the Hittite women. From the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods. But Solomon held fast to these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. Okay, we had already studied all of that. Now we're going to focus on the timing issue. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. So we know when this occurs, when Solomon's old. So when Solomon is old, let's read what he does. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and he did not follow the Lord fully as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Shirmos, and the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain which is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. Thus also he did for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Now the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after other gods, but he did not observe what the Lord had commanded. Do you remember those meetings? We talked about one of those meetings that God had with Solomon, and Solomon said, hey, God said, what do you want? He said, I want some wisdom to judge these people. And God gave it to him. But he never stopped having this command to follow God's ways. Verse 11, so the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I command you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. You see anything going on in Ecclesiastes that we find out right here what's being talked about? He doesn't get to pick who his heir is going to be. God said, you lost that ability. I get to decide. You got no say in it. And it's going to be a servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. Solomon, you mostly did so great in your life, I'm going to go ahead and leave one to your son. He wanted to take it all away. The only reason that I'm going to leave even the tiniest of anything to a son is because of David and because my chosen, Jerusalem, my chosen, because of what I want there to be a legacy is why I'm doing this. I am ripping your legacy that you thought your entire life you were building. I am ripping it from your hands because it was the most important thing to him. God was taking the most important thing to Solomon and ripping it from his hands. And was it for no reason at all? No, it was for a really big reason. In verse 11, we heard that God will tear the kingdom from you. That was Solomon. The kingdom will be given to the servant of Solomon. He says, I will not do it in your days. The event happened to the legacy of Solomon, and only one tribe is left to the son. That's what I want you to remember in those verses going forward as we look back at what influence is it having in what he's writing in Ecclesiastes. So let's go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. We were in verse 22. What question does Solomon ask? For what does a man get in all his labors and striving? Do you understand now why he's talking the way that he's talking now that you've gone back and you've read what's recorded in Kings? Right? It gives us that context that we needed to understand what he's writing about. It says, what does a man actually have to show for all his work on earth? Verse 23, what did this man who passes on his legacy do? Because all his days, his tasks, is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. Was it like that for him the whole time he was building all these things? Or does it now become grievous to him for him to look back and realize all that he spent that was going to be worthless? Can you understand that? It's grievous. It's beyond anything he can put into words. It's so horrible. And because it comes from the mouth of God, can he change it? He knows the future and he can't change it in all his wisdom. How much worse is it in all his wisdom to know these things than if he was a fool? The burden on this man is heavy. This was not just the activity of labor, but even the constant thinking about this activity that consumed this man's thoughts at night. All of it, from the thinking to the doing, it's all grievous. And this too is vanity. Whew. Do you even want to finish chapter 2? Let's finish. We're going to finish chapter 2. We're going to do verses 24 through 26. There is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? For to a person who is good in his sight, he is given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he is given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after wind. Seems to be a little switcheroo going on here, right? Yes, ma'am. No, I'm not going to shoot you down. No. So I think that goes back to this comparison of the folly and the wisdom. He was kind of prideful and thought that he was really smart. It's hard for us to understand all of this, and a lot of it's not recorded, so I have to be careful where I go with assumptions. So your question is, where's his wisdom, since we know this horrible thing that he did? One of the things that we don't have in our culture at all, that was common practice in that time, was marriage made your legacy. You brought a woman in. That's why it's advertised that he had the Egyptian wife. The son from that becomes a legacy to bring Israel and Egypt together. You know, we have a president that signs accords. Back then, you married the whoever so that your connection with them was long-lasting. The next president's going to come along and do something different, potentially, right? It's really hard when there's a son that's been established and that legacy goes on. So it's another form that Solomon saw in his earthly wisdom to build a legacy. There was no one like him. not all of these marriages, but a large number of those marriages. That's why he uses the term wives. And what was that second word? Before he did concubines, what was that second word? Princesses. What is a princess? She's the daughter of somebody who's of royalty. He's marrying into all the royal families on the earth. It was still sin, absolutely. He was doing it in his own, to build his own legacy. That's the sadness here in building his own legacy, what he did. It was not God's way. They were not to even be making covenants with anybody, and they did. He went beyond writing a covenant. He married in. He became one flesh with these women and these nations. And we know that because he didn't convert them to his God. They converted, they said, I'm holding on to my God. And he says, well, you know what? I'm going to go a step further. Let me build a place for you to do that. Professing to be wise, he was quite the fool. But I would associate this back to the legacy that he thought he was building for himself and doing it completely outside of God's rule. But again, we just see the multiple wives. There was a whole lot of stuff that was going on there that was acceptable in that culture, was reasonable for what you would do, and was how you built your legacy. But there's something sinister in that, and we're going to get there at the end of this because it's evil. That's why he uses the word grievous, and he says evil beyond belief. But I wanted you guys to see the history as we get there. So, did I do verse 22? What is the question that Solomon asks? So what does a man get? Oh, no, I moved on to verse 24. All right, you guys got to get on me when I do that. No, we're on 24. Don't go backwards. So in contrast to laboring, a man's tasks become painful and grievous. And what does Solomon describe? He's doing a contrast now. First verse tells us what? There's nothing better, right, for a man than to eat and to drink and to tell himself that his labor is good. All this time in Solomon's life, he says there is nothing better than this endeavor. Of all the things, all the pleasures, all the whatever, he can still say in contrast, there's nothing better than that. To eat and drink and tell yourself that your labor was good. Good here.
But he's saying it's from the hand of God, so he's giving God the glory.
So in verse 24, who can grant this? He says, this I have seen. Solomon says this he has seen for himself, that it is from the hand of God. It can only happen from the hand of God. In verse 25, what is the rhetorical question that Solomon asks? For who can eat, right? And who can have enjoyment without him? He just throws that out there for a reason. Verse 26. What does Solomon describe as coming from the hand of God? He says, for to a person who is good in his sight, he is given wisdom and knowledge and joy. While to the sinner, he is given the task of gathering and collecting so that he may give it to one who is good in God's sight. That last he, is it capitalized in your versions or not? Who has it capitalized? We have two. What's your version? The very last he that I just read, when it says, for the collecting so that he may give to one who is good. That he. Small. Most everybody's lower. The last word, he, used here, which is the one I just described, should be capitalized since the pronoun used prior was referring to God, and there's been no shift in the subject. So let's reread it by replacing the pronouns. For to a person who was good in God's sight, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. While to the sinner, God has given the task of gathering and collecting so that God may give to one who is good in God's sight. That's the way it should read. It's all about God, right? Both ways, all about God. So there's a contrast that Solomon's giving here. So who's the first person, or how is the first person described? For a person who's good in his sight. Right. And whose sight? It was God's sight. All right. What did God give that person who was good in his sight? Wisdom and knowledge and joy. Who do we know were given these exact gifts by God? Solomon. If you need a little reminder, 1 Kings chapter 3 in verses 12 and 13, he says, "Behold, I have done according to your words." This is God speaking to Solomon. "Behold, I have given you a wise and discerning heart, so that there has been no one like you before you, nor shall one like you arise after you. I have also given you what you have not asked for, both riches and honor, so that there will not be any among the kings like you all your days." You think that the riches and honor is what brought joy? God gave him all these things. He's talking about himself. Okay? Solomon was given wisdom and knowledge and riches and honor. Solomon called it back in Ecclesiastes joys. Ecclesiastes 26, how is the second state of a person described? To the sinner. What did God give this sinner? He does the task and the gathering and collecting. Why does God have the sinner gather and collect? To give it to one that's good in God's sight. So follow me, ladies, because here we go. God is always the one to give to the one who is good in his sight. This is true. And we can see that this is true even when we can't see it at work. We don't always get to see the outcome of that. And most of us will say, yeah, I know that's true. In God's economy, we don't always see it here. There are plenty of sinners and evil people who have inherited loads of wealth and other benefits in the worldly measure. There are also many testimonies throughout history of evil men who end up benefiting godly men. So there are stories that we know about that, Christian stories. Is this the point that Solomon's making here? Solomon has been sharing his observations lived out in his own life and how wisdom was meaningless and great wealth was meaningless. He has just established how he's thinking he could decide how to leave his legacy was also meaningless. That last thing that he was holding on to, he wasn't going to get it. It was meaningless. The two ways God can seem to respond to men are displayed in Solomon's life. Right? Some people would say there's two different people there. Well, God does this or God does that. Those aren't the same people. They were exactly the same people here. This is what God did to Solomon. That's why he said, I am sharing what I've been through, what God's done to me. And when I was seen as good, or maybe he was good, this is what God gave me. But then as a sinner, guess what God did? Took it. So we saw the first one in 1 Kings where we read chapter 3, verses 12 through 13. But that was not the end of the story for Solomon. We see a brief highlight first in 1 Kings chapter 3, one verse, which we've read. I want to do this because there's something being played out here. So we're going to do a little bit of an overview. At the beginning of 1 Kings in chapter 3, verse 3, we read, "Now Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father." So we get the good part. "Except he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places." Okay, so here's the sinner part that's referred to for us in Ecclesiastes, given to us in Kings. What did he do that was sin in God's eyes? Right there. And you can refer back to what we just read in 1 Kings 11. I'm just going to highlight. We're not going to read the whole thing, but I am going to highlight. I want you to be listening to these words. Starting in 1 Kings chapter 11, I'm going to start with verse 4. "For when Solomon was old, his wives turned." And in verse 5, Solomon went after the Asheroth and so forth. In verse 6, Solomon did what was evil in the sight. And in verse 7, Solomon built the high places. And in verse 8, for the foreign wives who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. That's the details of what is being set up here as the legacy. And what did God do in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 11? Because you have done this and you have not kept my word, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and I will give it to a servant. This was the worst punishment Solomon could endure for this sin. And Solomon acknowledges God is just. Back in Ecclesiastes 2 in verse 25 when he said, for who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? Ecclesiastes 2:26, after revealing how God deals with man, what does Solomon say? This is vanity and striving after wind. God will ultimately do as he determines, and it is meaningless to resist him. God told Solomon what the consequence of his sin was going to be. Solomon lived out the remainder of his life knowing this truth. This may be one of the reasons that Solomon writes Ecclesiastes. This was a grievous sin that Solomon committed against God. And I'm going to take the chance right here. We're going to do a rabbit trail. I call them. We're going to go off on this little rabbit trail because I want you to understand exactly how grievous this is. I don't think we really comprehend this, fully comprehend what he did. Solomon went after the Ashtoreth and Milcom. He built high places for Sheremoth and Molech. And there are plenty of horrible things involved in this kind of worship that we know of. I mean, gross immorality, sleeping with prostitutes, right? Just horrible things, that were immoral at their core went on. And we're not going to follow all those rabbit trails because we'd be here until next Tuesday. It was horrible, the kinds of things that were being done. But there is one gruesome practice that stood out beyond all the others as beyond grievous. Child sacrifice. Child sacrifice was being engaged in. God warns his people. We're just going to do a brief little review of what God said. God warns his people before they enter the promised land, specifically to avoid this, before they're even there, before they're participating in it. God warns them. In Leviticus 18, verse 21, he says, you shall not give any of your offspring to offer them to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Doesn't it seem all kind of like cleaned up? Don't give any of your offspring. Like, don't let them go work in the temple. Don't give any of your offspring. Don't sacrifice your children to these gods. That's what he's saying. He's warning them. In Leviticus chapter 20, I'm going to read verses 1 through 5. So 5 verses in Leviticus. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, you shall also say to the sons of Israel, any man from the sons of Israel or from the alien sojourning in Israel who gives any of his offspring to Molech shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I will also set my face against that man and I will cut him off. No legacy, maybe? From among his people. Because he has given some of his offspring to Molech, so as to defile my sanctuary and to profane my holy name. If the people of the land, however, should ever disregard that man when he gives any of his offspring to Molech, so as to not put him to death, then I myself will set my face against that man and against his family, and I will cut off from among their people both him and all those who play the harlot with him, by playing the harlot after Molech. Could he be any more specific? Does he repeat himself to make sure he's made the point clear? Those who give their offspring to Molech is talking about child sacrifice. And God will not accept this. In 2 Kings, we're going to look a little history. In 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 2, Ahaz, he's a king, all right, king in Israel. He was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. And he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord his God, and his father David had done. But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. He was following somebody else's example. He was walking in the way of the kings of Israel. And even made his son pass through the fire, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had driven out from before the sons of Israel. King Ahaz participated in the abomination of child sacrifice. And where did it begin? 2 Chronicles chapter 33, verse 1. I'm going to read through verse 9. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord dispossessed before the sons of Israel. For he built the high places which Hezekiah his father had broken down. He also erected altars for the Baals and made Asherim, and worshipped all the hosts of heaven and served them. He built altars in the house of the Lord, for which the Lord had said, "My name shall be in Jerusalem forever." For he built altars for all the hosts of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord. Could he be more brazen? He made his sons pass through the fire in the valley of Hinnom. And he practiced witchcraft. He used divination. He practiced sorcery. He dealt with mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. Then he put the carved image of the idol which he had made in the house of God, of which God had said to David and to Solomon his son, "In this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen from all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. And I will not again remove the foot of Israel from the land which I have appointed for their fathers, if only they will observe to do all that I have commanded them according to all the law, the statutes, and the ordinances given through Moses." Thus, Manasseh misled Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem to do more evil than the nations whom the Lord destroyed before the sons of Israel. Manasseh participated in child sacrifice with his own son in the valley of Hinnom. He led Judah to do more evil than the nations in the land before the Israelites were even there. Do some Wikipedia research and you'll just get a whole idea of what was there before. It's horrible. And God said Israel did worse, had more evil than all those that were there before. Let that sink in. In 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 10, this is talking about, and you get to the end of it here. It's, I can't think of his name right now. Josiah, right? He's the son of Manasseh. And it says, he also defiled, which means now he's using the defile in the good way for God. So he's defiled Topeth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, right? Ben Hinnom, that's where this was all going on, the child worship. That no man might make his son or his daughter pass through the fire for Molech. So Josiah comes along and destroys this altar that's been used for this very purpose. And it gives it that name Topeth. It was a very specific name, but it tells us it's in the valley of Hinnom, so we won't get confused. In verse 13, the high places which were before Jerusalem, which were on the right of the mount of destruction, which Solomon, the king of Israel, had built. For Ashtaroth, the abominations of the Sidonians, and for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, for Milcom, the abomination of the sons of Ammon, the king defied. He defiled. He took them down. But notice who gets credit in the scriptures. What is his legacy? What did Solomon bring to Jerusalem? Child sacrificing. That's the legacy. So Josiah, the son of Manasseh, he defiled these places, meaning he removed them. And notice that Topheth is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, or Ben Hinnom. It's the same place. Now we're going to go to Jeremiah with this prophecy, and then we're going to finish up here. In Jeremiah 19, starting in verse, I'm going to read 4 through 6. Because they have forsaken me and have made this an alien place and have burned sacrifices in it to other gods. All right, we're not talking vegetables here. We're not throwing some celery on there. All right, that's not the sacrifice he's talking about. Neither they nor their forefathers nor the kings of Judah had ever known, and because they have filled this place with the blood of the innocent. What is that describing for you? And have built the high places of Baal to burn their sons in the fire as burnt offerings to Baal, a thing which I never commanded or spoke of, nor did it enter my mind. God would never ask for such a thing. Therefore, behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when this place will no longer be called Topheth in the valley of Hinnom, but rather the valley of slaughter. Then skip down starting in verse 10. Then you are to break the jar. This is Jeremiah being told what to do so that it can be seen as an example of what's coming. Then you are to break the jar in the sight of the men who accompany you and say to them, thus says the Lord of hosts, just so will I break this people and this city, even as one breaks a potter's vessel, which cannot again be repaired. And they will bury in Topheth, because there is no other place for burial. This is how I will treat this place and its inhabitants, declares the Lord, so as to make this city like Topheth. The houses of Jerusalem and the houses of the kings of Judah will be defiled like the place Topheth. What's the defilement in Topheth? Child sacrifice. Because of all the houses and whose rooftops they burned sacrifices to all the heavenly host and poured out drink offerings to other gods. It wasn't just contained in one place. They just took it home. Who knows what they sacrificed on their rooftops? For the sons of Judah have done that which is evil in my sight, declares the Lord. They have set their detestable things in the house which is called by my name and defiled it. They have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command, and it did not come to my mind. This is a repeat in Jeremiah's day. Therefore, behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no longer be called Topheth or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of the slaughter, for they will bury in Topheth, because there is no other place. The dead bodies of this people will be food for the birds of the sky and for the beasts of the earth, and no one will frighten them away. Nobody's going to shoo the bird away. Then I will make to cease from the cities of Judah and from the streets of Jerusalem the voice of joy and the voice of gladness and the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, for the land will become a ruin. At that time, declares the Lord, they will bring out the bones of the kings of Judah and the bones of its princes and the bones of the priests and the bones of the prophets and the bones of the inhabitants of Jerusalem from their graves. They will spread them out to the sun, the moon, and to all the hosts of heaven, which they have loved and which they have served. Do you see the irony? They served all of those under the sun and the moon and the stars. Their bones will be dug up and they will be laid out, exposed to the sun and the moon and the stars. And which they have gone after, and which they have sought, and which they have worshipped, and they will not be gathered or buried. They will be as dung on the face of the ground. Indeed, this city has been to me a provocation of my anger and my wrath from the day they built it, even to this day, so that it should be removed from before my face. Because of all the evil of the sons of Israel and the sons of Judah, which they have done to provoke me to anger, that their kings and their leaders and their priests and their prophets and the men of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, they have turned their back on me and not their face, though I taught them, teaching again and again that they would not listen and receive instruction. But they put their detestable things in the house which is called by my name, and they defiled it. They built the high places of Baal that are in the valley of Hinnom to cause their sons and daughters to pass through the fire of Molech, which I had not commanded them, nor had it entered my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin. Is it sinking into you what is being talked about that is so grievous? One last reference in Micah, chapter 6, there's 3 verses. With what shall I come to the Lord and bow myself before the God on high? Shall I come to him with burnt offerings, with yearly calves? Does the Lord take delight in thousands of rams, in 10,000 rivers of oil? Listen to this. Shall I present my firstborn for my rebellious acts, the fruit of my body, for the sins of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly? God never asks for the sacrifice of the life of a child to be given to him, like the worship of other gods had demanded. And they chose to follow that. Child sacrifice, this is the overview of the scriptures that we just read. Child sacrifice took place in worship of Moloch. The emphasis of death took place saying they filled this place with the blood of the innocent. It wasn't 1 or 2. Don't let that escape what's being communicated. Filled with blood of the innocents. That's how many children were sacrificed. This took place in the valley of Hinnom. Many other corrupt practices in worship to many other false gods filled Israel. Solomon is recognized as the king that built the places for these events that took place. This, ladies, is the legacy of Solomon. Do you not understand? And Solomon's writing to us in Ecclesiastes, talking about his wasted life and all his efforts under the sun. And he didn't even know where this was going to go. But he opened a very evil door that God knew. God knew what legacy there was going to be. And so God says, I'm taking this out for you to decide who gets to come after you. It's generations before the fulfillment. What if the next guy would have just opened the floodgates and let it be the next generation after Solomon? I mean, we can still see God's protective and grace-filled hand in the delay of how long it took for Israel to follow this. But don't ever miss the fact that Israel followed this horrible and detestable activity without there's no description as to why. There's no reason as to why. But don't you see that little hint in Malachi? Shall I present my firstborn for my rebellious acts to cover my sin? There's a link that I'm going to put into your notes if you want to go read it, and you can do some research on your own. Let's just say last night and this morning were a little downer in my house as I was reading this awful stuff. But I was like, we need to understand why God had to deal with Solomon the way he dealt with him.